Thank you, Chris, and I'd like to welcome you that may be joining us on social media or whatever platform you're using to a special call board meeting. And I'd like at this time to call the meeting to order. And item number A is to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Dr. Lamb made a motion to approve the agenda. Mary Adrian Davis made a second. All in favor, let me know by lifted hand. The only item on our agenda tonight is to approve an updated COVID-19 plan for Garrard County Schools. Mr. Stoll?
Okay, if I take this down to make sure you all can hear.
You certainly may.
Thank you. So as you all know, last week there was a special session held at the Kentucky Legislature, and part of that process that was passed was that each district had to update their COVID-19 plan. And one of the things that happened in the meeting also, or in the session also, was the removal of the mandate for masking. So every district is now going to be in a spot where they have to make a determination about how you're going to respond to masks. A month and a half or so ago, we had a conversation about what we would do when those went away, and our numbers were fairly low at the time. Most of you know that our numbers in the county have been in the red for several weeks now. We were in the hundreds on Friday, a place that we never went last year. I never had to show those numbers when we did that. So despite what had been recommended previously, I'm coming to you tonight to make a recommendation to you that we maintain masks for the foreseeable future, but with a limit to how far that goes. The limit being no longer than December without a review. Should you all decide that you wanted to look at the plan between now and then, we certainly could do that, but I'm asking that we not go any further than December without reassessing where we are based on numbers. I'm not asking you to do that looking at masking as a guarantee that it resolves every issue. It's not a medical request that I'm making here. The request that I'm making is based on the protocols that are in place by the health department. And the health department, Kentucky Department of Public Health, not the Garrard County Health Department, has set certain expectations. One of those expectations, and I'm going to scroll to it so everyone can see it, says that in a K-12 environment, if we are 3 feet or more away and we have been masked, that we don't have to be quarantined. That masking has to be consistent. Without the mask, we have to quarantine. And so we've faced some challenges the last week or so with this, but I can assure you that if we take the mask out of it, the numbers will be significantly more as far as the quarantine. I'm not necessarily speaking about people who have a positive case. I want to distinguish that so that everybody understands what we're talking about. So the recommendation that I'll have for you tonight is that we maintain masking with a deadline to go back and look, and that we reemphasize to the community several things that we've highlighted here. One is that if a student has already been tested and they're waiting on a result, that they not be part of school, they not be part of athletics. That would give an exposure that could be a problem for us. The reason being, in an athletic environment, we don't have the masks. So if we have a student who participates and then we find out that they were positive and they've been waiting on a test, that just increases the number of students that we have to quarantine. So what we're really looking at here is a method to try to limit the number of quarantines that we have to put into place. We'd remind the students and we'd remind staff that if there's a temperature of 104, that's a good time not to show up to school. All the other pieces that we have in here are pieces that already existed. We're not changing any of those. We are including in this a clear explanation of how a quarantine comes into play, so that there's no doubt about that. And I am also including in this recommendation the opportunity for us to look at the test to stay model. Test to stay model is another way that we could potentially remove a quarantine, but we want to make sure that it's feasible. So one of the challenges is the logistics of it. We've been working with a couple of companies to try to understand how that works, and it would not be a requirement. I want to be clear about that. If we put it in place, it would be something that would be an option for parents to consider, but not a requirement for them to do that in any capacity. So that's a quick summary of what that is. If you all pass this tonight, it will post tonight. We will put it on the website tonight so that everyone is clear with that. We'll also submit it to KDE, which is a requirement, not for their approval, but for information. We can go back and modify the plan anytime we like and resubmit that to KDE and repost it. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have relative to that, and I can walk through anything more that you would like.
I've got a question, not necessarily on that part of it, but as far as students who miss school because of illness, is there a current plan covered that somehow or another, whether it's the student's responsibility to contact and find out what their assignments are so that our students don't fall behind? Because I know there's a lot of classes in our schools right now that are in the 80s range as far as attendance, which is kind of hard to keep them open if it stays in that range for that long from past experience. But I want to make sure that what we're discussing still keeps those guidelines that, you know, it's somebody's responsibility and it's clear whose responsibility to make sure that the student has an opportunity to catch up on any more missed while they're either quarantined, sick, or whatever. And everybody knows that.
So it's probably as good a question as can be asked tonight is what happens with a student when they're not here. And so to your point, one of the things that we requested of all of our principals last week was reestablishing all of our Google Classrooms to make sure that those are available. So that becomes a site that the student can go to. Also, we're asking to make sure that there's an opportunity for interaction between the teacher and the student. It will not be a synchronous learning, but we're trying to do both pieces simultaneously. That's a lot of effort on staff to try to make happen. But it could be, right.
There's a question, you know, they miss 2 or 3 days and they're covered, something's covered. And then when they get their assignments, they don't understand. They can somehow or other have the
Correct.
accommodation to find out.
So it
Okay,
could be,
I wasn't there. I don't know how you do this. And how can I figure this out so that I can do what I need to do?
so there are a number of different ways that can happen. It
Yeah.
could be through Google Meet. It could be through office hours. It could be through a teacher actually videoing the class and posting the class video, but it may not be like last year where you had the direct face-to-face with the teacher. It would be a summary of that. But that is a requirement that we have as an expectation. In the past, if a student missed 1 day, you probably don't get significantly behind. In a quarantine, you could be out for several days, and that's the reason why we like to try to limit quarantines where possible, because we want the student to be in person, face-to-face with teachers, not having to deal with that challenge. Again, we would not suggest that any of these methods meet all of the expectations that a parent would have, but we want to make sure that they're. So when a parent has reached out and had a question, we've tried to answer it by providing this information.
And Mr. Tull, forgive me if I misunderstood. I thought a while ago you said the temperature of 104. Did you say 100.4?
I meant to say 100.4. If I said 104, that would have been wrong.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you for
I
clarifying.
may have, my hearing's not the best.
Or you wouldn't be thinking about coming out anyway. Or I would.
Mr. Soul, do you mind to scroll back down to the bottom of that document? I was going to ask.
Sure, if you all let me do something. Chris just said that I had forgotten to share this. So let me do that real quickly to make sure that people can see it as well. That's my fault. I apologize. Since we didn't have the other one live, I wasn't sharing. Give me just a second.
Also, we haven't been live.
You've been live, but my copy of this was not live.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, that's not your fault. I had not shared. So let me get that shared and then it will be okay. Okay, we should be there.
So the folks watching weren't able to see this?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, Dr. Lamb, is this what you were talking about?
Yes, I'm just curious about this, the difference that we're making between our vaccinated versus our unvaccinated students. I have not seen that guidance written anywhere from Kentucky Public Health, or can you tell me where that came from?
It's the same document that I have listed at the top, the Kentucky Public Health that came out August 18th. We're trying to go follow that exactly to the best of our ability. The way it is stated is it says, as I have it there, you may not need to quarantine. It does not say that you wouldn't. So if you go back to the top of fully vaccinated following an exposure, it says if you are fully vaccinated, you may not need to quarantine, and it lists all this other information. The key one being if you develop a symptom, you would have to quarantine. So even with the vaccine, if you had a symptom, you would still have to quarantine.
So I think the difference for me is if you've got a vaccinated student with an exposure, they can test in 3 to 5 days and come back to school. But if we've got an unvaccinated student, we're going to make them stay out until after day 5.
Again, that's the guidance that we have.
Makes absolutely no sense.
That's the guidance that we have. And that's why I keep going back to this thing is I'm not asking this from the standpoint of what the medical process is. This is from what the procedural process is. So when the legislature met last week, what they changed was a mandate. They did not change those protocols. If the protocols had been changed, then you'd have a different option, but that's not what occurred. So we're still living within the confines of that.
Couple of questions. If a student is out with COVID, but they're still counted in attendance, right? And we're basing our ADA on what, 18-19 or 18-19 school year?
18-19 is what the state or what the legislature approved last week. What they also included in that was a look at growth factor, but they were going to base that on the meeting of the regular session, which begins in January. That's important to us because our enrollment is as high as it's ever been.
Yeah.
We've never had higher enrollment in the county than we have currently. And so we hope that there's a factor that comes into play with growth that will benefit the district, benefit the students, benefit our staff, benefit the community. But they did not address that one last week, other than to say they were going to look at it when we roll into January.
And my second question is the teacher that contacts COVID or becomes around someone that has to go out. What does that do to their sick days? Do we have any, are we taking care of our teachers in any way? Or is anything added for them?
So I'm asking you to do that Thursday night. Thursday night, I have a piece in place where I'm asking you to put in what we had hoped that they would do last week at the legislative session, which they did not. We thought that they might come back with COVID days like they had last year. All that originally was put in was if you were quarantined and you were vaccinated. That had not been expanded in any fashion. Last week, we hoped that they would add to those, for those teachers who contract or contact through contact tracing, would be able to show that it happened at school. So on Thursday, not part of tonight's plan, but on Thursday, we're going to ask you to give a block of days for an individual that if they did test positive and it was part of the school district's exposure, that you grant them those days and it not be part of their sick days, and we would ask you to make it retroactive back to the beginning of the school year. So anybody who hadn't had that in place, we would still be able to cover that.
I was just asked that question today, and so if any teacher you're watching, there's the answer to that question.
So they received that this morning. They received that this morning in an email. I sent an email to the staff this morning indicating what I was going to ask for tonight relative to the plan and how it impacted masks. I also shared with them that I'd be asking for those days on Thursday night so that they would have an awareness of what our expectations were. This is all a bit of a reaction to what did or did not occur last week, rather than us being in front of it. We did not go in front of it because we didn't know what would happen. And if you'll remember, KSBA even recommended to be very careful about giving those days until we knew exactly where things were going to stand. I feel like we know where things stand now, and so we can move forward with that offering.
I'd like to say too, we appreciate all of you that have contacted us as board members. We've got folks that are vehemently opposed to any mask mandate. We've got folks that are vehemently for mask mandates. And so we've got to make the best decision for the health and safety of our teachers, our students, and all of our employees. And so we've decided that this is the best approach. And if this thing begins to clear up, then we can change that. I think, or December 16th board meeting, I think it'll be.
We've included that as the deadline for you to have to review it. I would submit to you that if this all fell off rapidly and we needed to look in November, that I would come to you and ask you to look in November. We wanted to put a date on here though that said no later than this date you would take a look at it, rather than say that this was going to carry for the entire year.
Yes.
Anything of that nature.
And I guess from, correct me if I'm wrong, but from the way I am visualizing this, we're doing this not because we believe in masks or don't believe in masks. We're doing this as a strategy to keep our kids in school
Yes.
and give them the best possible opportunity that they can have to have teacher contact. And so this is just to me, it's a strategy. Being an old coach, I think it's a strategy for our kids.
Thank you, Coach.
I would just like to add to that, you know, we have received support for masks, and we've received just as much support against masks. And whether you believe in them or you don't believe in them, we are still one community with one purpose, and that's to do the best that we can for our kids. And we know that the best that we can do for them is keep them in the classroom. And so whether I agree with doing it or I don't agree with doing it is irrelevant at this point. But the thing that bothers me is that it has become such a divisive factor in our community. And I would really like to challenge folks that are listening to not allow the decision that the board is forced to make tonight to be one that divides us even further, but to try to unite and do what we know we have to do to get through this until it goes away. So it's not an easy decision, and it's not one that I take lightly. But at the same time, when you look at the criteria for isolation and quarantine, masked versus unmasked, it makes sense that we would support the proposal that Mr. Stoll has brought forward. So.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb. Are we ready for a motion?
Yes.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Mr. McQuarrie made a motion to approve this COVID-19 plan. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Mary Adrian Davis, seconded. Do we have any other discussion? All in favor, let me know by lifted hand. All board members were in favor. Our COVID-19 plan is approved. Well, that's the only business on the agenda. So at this time, we've come to adjournment.
Make the motion to adjourn.
Mr. McQuarrie loves to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hurt,
You
second.
notice I also make the motions to adopt the minutes at the start of the meeting.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm
true.
equally pleased to start the meetings and end the meeting.
Yeah, you get paid extra for that.
I've got, you done that.
Thank you. All in favor of adjournment? All board members, we are adjourned. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it.
We have done well.